Alastair, I was listening to your question and answer podcast over the weekend, and you started with Gaza, and you listed a set of statistics which was absolutely horrifying. And it's not just about the destruction of human life; it's the destruction of everything.
Well, yeah, it's as I said there in the clip that you played, it's the ecosystem, and these figures all came from an official report by this body, the IPC, which looks at famine and analyzes famine. It's the first time they've returned to one area on 5 different occasions. So just to give you some more, 62% of the road network destroyed, 82% of agricultural wells destroyed, 71% of greenhouses, 90% of cropland. 26% of sheep have survived, and as Rory Stewart pointed out in the podcast, you can argue that when, as the Israelis do, that they're always targeting Hamas terrorists, and sometimes civilians get caught in the crossfire, as it were. But sheep, goats, 1.4% of poultry in Gaza have survived. I mean, this is of a scale that is really, really, really hard to fathom. And then, you talk about children and their health. Almost half of children had diarrhea during July, 58% had fever, 25% acute respiratory episodes, and half of children now have serious skin conditions. I mean, this is it's on a level that we can barely fathom. And the problem with the way that, the whole issue is now debated, and it's almost like we've become numb to hearing this stuff. And of course, the other thing that we don't see much of it because the media, the international media is not allowed in there, and over 200 journalists who are there have now been killed.
What about the equivocation by some of the European countries? I mean, some still supplying weaponry to Israel to perpetrate all of this kind of stuff. And even though there is an option there very quickly for the European Union to stop its trade with Israel, because Israel has now broken all of the caveats that applied to that trade deal, they still trade.
They do, and I think, look, these are really difficult judgments that governments have to make the whole time. I mean, we had this when we were I was working with the Labour government in all sorts of different areas where you continue to do business with countries that are doing things that you find difficult or offensive, and the politics of this are unbelievably difficult and unbelievably complicated. But I think the one thing I don't think anybody can say is that Israel is behaving in a legal or proportionate way. And thank you for mentioning the podcast. When October the 7th happened, Rory Stewart and I sat down and said, listen, this is going to get so polarized, it's going to get so difficult in terms of the public debate. We should try to be fair to both sides at all times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that I find it very, very hard to see this as anything other than genocide. And the truth is that you see the leader, when you say that, and lots of people who support Israel get very, very offended, but you just have to listen to what they say, listen to what Ben Gvir and Smotrich are saying. They are actively destroying the possibility of a two-state solution. They're actively, I would argue, exploiting what happened on October 7th, horrible as it was, to bury the idea that there can ever be a Palestinian state. And they're openly talking about, removing people from Gaza and annexing the West Bank. Well, along the way, there is going to be more and more suffering. And it seems to me that the way that the international community that we talk about has not managed to rein this in is the tragedy of our times.
Now, I was looking at something else over the weekend, and, the notion that, well, the Palestinians in Gaza, they elected Hamas. Now, it's a long time ago, and given a chance, maybe in the interim, they might not have re-elected them, but they did elect them. And these are people who espouse violence, the destruction of Israel, and so on.
Yeah.
And then, and therefore, they're being punished for that. But then you look to the West Bank, where they voted in a government that did not espouse the elimination of Israel and did not go the militaristic route. And what did they get for their pains in doing it, if you like, the right way? They got more settlements, they got more abuse, more restriction, more apartheid.
Yeah. And the thing about the settlement is that this has gone on year after year after year after year. And I think we said the last time I spoke to you about, we talked about living in an era of impunity. There was a report I saw on Channel 4 News the other night where the reporter confronted a guy who was filmed. He was an Israeli settler, part of the settler movement. He was armed. He was filmed killing a Palestinian who, and the film is there. The reporter confronts this guy, and he's laughing and he's looking at his phone. We think he's looking at pictures of what this reporter is showing him, and he's laughing. And then eventually he just sort of stands up and walks away. And that's impunity. That's basically saying, I can go around killing Palestinians, and there may be Israeli military who are watching me, but they don't care. Now that's when you ally that to some of the other elements of impunity that are happening in the world, it is no wonder that people worry that the sort of basic rules and decency that we hope govern most of our societies are eroding.
When we had Netanyahu last week talking about the tragic mishap, that was the term he used, of the journalist being killed at Nasser Hospital, but almost immediately the IDF come out with a statement saying they were after a Hamas operative, and that was their justification. And then they did what was called the double tap. In other words, they bombed or shot with a tank, I think it was, and then as people went to help those in distress, they did it again.
Yeah, which is a well-known tactic, usually associated with authoritarian states, and
and the
Russia
IRA did it too. I mean, there's no question.
Indeed, absolutely. So I think that this just underlines my point about the horror, and I think more and more people so frustrated and so agitated about it. There is an element, I think, of us becoming almost immune to the shock, and it's hard because every single day, not just in relation to Gaza but other things around the world, you kind of wake up, you listen to the news, and you think, God, I'm not sure I can cope with more of this, and then people start to turn away. And I think that I saw recently a kind of before and after aerial. It was drone footage of the reality of Gaza on the ground, and it is just incredible, the change. And if you're Ben Gvir or you're Smotrich, and I suspect if you're Netanyahu as well, you think, well, that's job done. That's what we're setting out to do. But of course, they're doing it, particularly from Netanyahu's perspective, constantly saying it's just about destroying Hamas. But as you say, in so many of these situations where they've killed women, they've killed children, they've killed journalists who are trying to tell the world what's going on, and it's always, it was justified because we took out somebody from Hamas. Well, you don't see the names, you don't see the faces. It's just, the feeling is, it's hard to escape the feeling that they basically think, in part because they've got the support of the United States, they think we can do what the hell we want.
That question of how long this can go on, how big the resistance is in Israel, I mean, more and more voices realizing that the hostages will never come back if the IDF continue what they're doing, that the hostages will invariably be either killed by their captors or killed by incoming bombardment by Israel.
Yeah, but also so they say that their goal, their strategic and their military goal is to destroy Hamas, and you can understand why they want to do that. As you say, Hamas, an organization that is absolutely open about, does not believe that Israel has the right to exist. It did what it did on October 7th and has done plenty before, but just. We talk about radicalization sometimes. Imagine if you are a child that's growing up in Gaza today, about what your attitude is likely to be towards Israel. So the idea that they can destroy an organization, an ideology, a belief, when actually, to some extent, they are fueling the thinking of that ideology. And that's why I think that ultimately this is a catastrophe for Israel. They may feel like they're winning it, but where it ends, I mean, heaven knows. And as you say, the resistance and the anger about the government, it seems to be growing rather than receding. And if you go back to pre-October the 7th, of course, I mean, look, Netanyahu, I mean, I met Netanyahu several times with Tony Blair because, of course, he's been around for a long time. He's been, if you tot up all the years he's been prime minister, he's been there. He's not far off Putin longevity. And the fact is that before October the 7th, he was clinging on. He had all the protests about his changes to the Supreme Court, and and what has happened, I think, since the war, since October 7th, is that it's hard to escape this conclusion that he's seized it as an opportunity for his own political survival, and that is cynicism of a pretty horrific scale, I'd say.